When you've lived somewhere long enough, you don't realize how strange it actually can be. You believe what they tell you is normal, and if you don't dig too deep, this town we live in appears heavenly. When you come to live in Axbury, you sure are taken care of for the rest of your life. All the houses on all our streets are beautifully crafted in their specific individual ways to make a family feel welcome and happy. We are told this exact fact when we are assigned to help with a new house. It started out small many years ago, a tiny village with just the basic necessities, like a small grocery store, a school, and a doctor's office. But it has grown exponentially to a town with more than 1,000 people. I can't say exactly what it looked like in the beginning because that was way before I was even born. All I can say is that during the 16 years of my life, I've enjoyed living here. Every week we have a big market in the center of town where we can buy everything that our hearts desire. When the market isn't there, we have a number of businesses and boutiques run by the people that live here. There's a cinema and a theater and different clubs you can join. It really is very seldom that a person or a family moves away from here, but when they do, their house is renovated or a new one is built. During the last few months, I helped with the finishing touches of the newest house in our town. It is especially exciting to me as it filled the empty spot right next to ours, meaning we would get new neighbors soon. I kept waiting and waiting to see who the new people would be. Every day when I came home from school, I checked if they were there yet. When the holidays started, I began spending significantly more time sitting by the window in my room, looking for a moving truck. When the new family finally moved and I completely missed it, my friend Jules had stayed over, and we had fallen asleep watching The Grinch. We both woke up early in the morning from loud sounds and commotion coming from next door. We both jumped up to look out the window where we saw a few neighbors standing in front of the new house. With Jules right behind me, I ran downstairs to the kitchen where my parents and my little brother were having breakfast. Mom smiled when she saw me. "Good morning, you two." Our neighbors arrived, and I heard they have a son just your age. My dad, who was cooking some eggs and scraping the pan like crazy, didn't turn around or wished us good morning. He looked like a wreck. Mom awed when she caught me looking at him. "Your dad didn't get a minute of sleep," she laughed. Finally, Dad turned towards us. What an inconvenience, moving into a new house in the middle of the night. "Did you see them yet?" Jules asked. "Not yet, but I was gonna go over soon with a basket of muffins. You girls can join me if you like," Mom asked. My dad shook his head. "Mary, maybe you should give them some time to settle in first." Jules looked disappointed, and for some reason, I felt the same way. I know it might sound weird how big of a deal this is to all of us, but as I said before, Axbury was a bit different, and new people in such a small town can change a lot. Dad went to work, and we all ignored what he had said. Mom had spent the morning baking muffins and filling a pretty wooden basket. She said we still had dozens of them in the basement from back when we moved here, so everyone is just gifting each other baskets back and forth. Jules asked. I saw a bunch of them at our place too. Jules had been my best friend ever since I could remember. She lived down the street and was almost like a sister to me. My mom chuckled. Well, it's not about the basket, it's about what's in it. And well, about the gesture. We want to make the new family feel welcome. The door was already open, but we still knocked. A house that I'd only seen empty was now filled with furniture, decorations, and at least 6 different baskets filled with muffins. Jules and I exchanged a look and tried not to laugh. I guess it isn't about what's inside either. Hello. A woman my mother's age approached the door. She was wearing a yellow dress. Her black hair framed her face that had at least 3 layers of makeup on it. Hi there. My name is Mary Lawrence. This is my daughter Charlie. We live right next door. My mom squeezed my shoulder, and this is our dear friend Julia. How nice to meet you, the woman said with a bright smile. My name is Helen Lester. Please come inside. My husband Anthony is just in the living room. We followed her through the house, and I couldn't help but wonder how quickly they had furnished everything inside. When I was here, the whole house was still bare. How did they do all that in just one night? Mr. Lester was sitting on the sofa staring at a black television without any movement, but when he heard us approach, he quickly turned towards us, although he didn't stand up. Anthony, honey, these are our new neighbors. Mary, Julia, and she took a short pause as if she had to remember my name. And Charlie, his serious face swiftly turned into a smile. even bigger than the one of his wife's, though I could swear I saw a twitch in there. "Good day," he called out. Poor Anthony hurt his leg working in the house. Helen's smile turned into a dramatic frown. "How unfortunate," my mom responded in a tone that sounded slightly judgmental, though I couldn't say why. Jules and I stood behind her awkwardly that entire time until we heard a new noise calling hello into the house. Another neighbor with a basket full of muffins. What a lovely couple, weren't they? Though it was slightly odd that they never introduced that son I heard about. He must have been in there somewhere, right? My mom asked me as we walked back home. We left shortly after the other neighbors came in and Jules went back to hers. I shrugged. We didn't introduce Dad or Benny either. Yes, all in good time, I guess. For the rest of the day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about those people and the entire interaction was off. I didn't mention anything to my mother because whenever I tried, she responded in a very strict manner, and I probably would have just ignored my thoughts, as I normally would. There is a new family every year. The only thing different about this one is that they live so incredibly close. I told myself that I felt some type of attachment as I personally helped with the house, but when I saw Alex, I realized there was something much bigger going on. Most people in Axbury go to bed awfully early. My parents turn off all the lights before 10, and all the noises just disappear. When I'm not ready to sleep, I often sit in the nook by my window and draw something. It's quiet and relaxing most times, but that night I looked outside and saw a pale face staring at me with wide empty eyes from the window across the street. My body froze in a moment of shock. When my breath came back, it was short and rapid. I'd recently gotten used to looking at the empty house, and I suppose for a moment I forgot that it wasn't empty anymore. But whoever was staring at me did not look alright. Through the darkness, it was hard to see, but this person kept scratching the window. When our gazes met, he pushed his head against the window again and again. I couldn't say for sure, but it seemed like he was screaming, until all of a sudden, he was pulled away from the window, and it all stopped. I'm ashamed to admit how long it took me to finally get into action. As my thoughts became clearer, I finally walked to my parents' bedroom, trying to somehow explain what I just witnessed. "Charlie, this is more than absurd. Do you hear yourself?" my mother said in the aforementioned strict tone. I know, but I swear something happened. We need to check on them. We've met the Lesters, and they seemed like perfectly fine people. "Now calm down," my mother said. "We didn't meet the son," I shouted, to which my mother responded with a stern look. Now my dad, who was sleepy and groggy, chimed in. "You met them. I thought we said we would wait." My mother just shrugged, and then Dad got up from bed and left the room. Mom and I exchanged a quick look and then followed. "Howard, what are you doing?" Now, Mom sounded more scared than strict. I thought Dad would go next door, but he walked to my room and straight to my window, and then he waved. Slowly we walked up to the window, Mom making sure she was a step ahead of me. When I reached the window, I couldn't believe my eyes. Mr. and Mrs. Lester were standing by the window where I witnessed the horrors earlier, looking at us with the exact same smile while waving. "See, all is fine. It is dark. You must have hallucinated," Dad said. "Yes," my mom added. "Now let us let the neighbors sleep. I will make you some warm milk to calm you down." No, my dad chimed in. "It is late, Charlie. Just go to bed." To be honest, I thought the subject would just be dropped. My parents didn't say a word the next day. I think we were all a bit surprised when the Lesters rang our doorbell around noon the next day, and this time they had their son with them. During daylight, he didn't look scary at all. His brown eyes appeared bloodshot, but not empty, and his face wasn't that pale, but had a nice touch of color. His hair that yesterday went in all directions was neatly styled back. My parents invited them inside, and we all sat down in the living room. "Dear Charlie, we want to sincerely apologize for Alex scaring you like that," Helen said while not blinking even once. "A dumb boyish prank." The father awkwardly chuckled while gently nudging Alex, whose face distorted for just a fraction of a second. But then he really looked as if he felt bad. "I'm sorry, that was really stupid of me," he said. "I didn't mean to scare you." He sounded sincere. I looked at all the concerned faces around me and let out a short laugh. "It's really okay, I was just surprised, not scared," I lied. The lie seemed to help though, because suddenly all the adults seemed far more relaxed. Well, now that the issue is resolved, how would you like to join us for a barbecue? Dad enthusiastically suggested. They stayed the whole afternoon. The Lesters were really nice, saying all the right things, and even Mom was warming up. Alex was rather quiet, but friendly and polite. He talked about how he liked to play soccer, and that he already saw all the sports fields we have in Axbury. Dad liked that. Benny asked if Alex would play video games with him, which he politely agreed to. So the three of us went inside while the parents stayed in the garden. Alex and I were alone in the living room for just a minute, sitting next to each other on the sofa, while Benny went to get his games. So have you met many people here yet? I asked, trying to make small talk. Alex looked around the room really quickly, and then came really close to my face. I have no idea what happened last night, he whispered. I don't think I've ever met you, but... He pulled his shirt up a bit, and pulled his pants down just enough to show something written on his lower stomach. No, not written, carved. With a knife? Or something similar from the looks of it, though the wound didn't appear fresh. It's upside down, he whispered. But can you study it? He pulled back quickly as we heard footsteps approaching. But I did see what it said. Charlie, the books in the library, the movies in the cinema, the games we could play. All of them were limited to a specific collection, a way to mimic what was on the outside to give us a sense of having entertainment and choices, when in reality we only learned and saw what we were supposed to. Of course, I didn't know it then, and I never should have known. I never would have figured it out if it weren't for that slight coincidence that got the suspicion rolling. Alex says it might have been fate. I believe it was my dad. My name written on the stomach of a boy I'd never seen before had to mean something. Of course, after what I'd seen in the night, I wasn't yet sure whether I could trust this Alex. I had been living a happy and fulfilled life in Axbury. There was never anything that I missed, nothing I desperately longed for. He was the only factor that led to the disruption of my belief system, and what kind of person would I be if I let some random guy do that? I had a mind of my own after all, so I tried to ignore the issue. I told myself that I'd ask Alex to leave me alone if he tried to bother me again. He should play his weird games on his own. I was set on that, but then Alex surprised me. For the next few days, we saw each other occasionally. We'd get the mail from outside at the same moment. We'd be at the grocery store picking something up for our parents, or we'd be at the sports center at the same time. And every time he was being awfully normal. During each of those occasions, Alex acted just like everyone else. He waved, said hello, or he'd ask me something simple like, "Do you know where the green beans are?" But it never went further than that. He treated me just like a regular neighbor. He had entirely adapted to our way of living, and that's what got my blood boiling. He ignored the issue, which resulted in me not being able to ignore it any longer. This boy had brought some kind of change to town. I just didn't know what exactly was going on. Of course, I couldn't talk to my parents about any of this, not after the way they reacted on the night I saw the strange act of Alex through his window. I didn't even tell Jules, my closest and longest friend. For reasons I couldn't explain, I felt I had to keep it all to myself. In Axbury, we don't voice criticism or speak of bad emotions. Most of the time we don't need to, and when you do feel negative, it feels silly to bother others with it. You don't want to be the odd one out, so I thought the best thing I could do would be to befriend Alex to try and figure out more about him. So this is where you usually hang out. Alex's gaze switched between Jules and me. We were sitting at the coffee house overlooking the marketplace. Getting him to join us for coffee was easy. I just acted like it was a spontaneous idea when I saw him helping his mom out in their yard. She was thrilled by the idea of him socializing as well. Not exclusively, but often. We usually come after school, but it's the holidays now, Jules said. Alex nodded. It's nice. Good coffee, he said, and added 3 cubes of sugar to his cup. Yes, it's the absolute best. Well, to be honest, it is the same roast you can get at the market as well, but it does taste nicer when someone else brews it, I think. Jules kept talking. Alex nodded and kept adding sugar cubes to his coffee. That's a lot of sugar, I said when his cup was starting to overflow. Jules hadn't even noticed. Alex looked down. Sorry, I think I zoned out for a moment. Last night He was interrupted by the waitress, who came over with a pot full of fresh coffee. Without even asking, she started pouring coffee into Alex's cup, which was already filled to the brim. "Oh, look at you, your drink is all sugared up. We should add a bit more caffeine or the sweetness will go to your head," she cheerfully said, as she removed his cup and filled a new one with coffee so hot that it looked like it was boiling inside of the cup. Alex was really fun once he warmed up. He seemed witty and fit well into our little group. I was starting to think that he could hang out with me and Jules more often. We sat in the coffee house for another hour that practically flew by, talking about all sorts of things. As it turned out, we had a lot of the same favorite movies, books, and artists, which made me wonder how he'd grown up. "What was the place like where you lived before?" I asked. Alex didn't even think before answering. "Typical, not spectacular, a place to live, not to love. We had neighbors, but no real community, and our house wasn't as nice as the one we live in now." I thought his reply sounded a bit strange, but Jules nodded in agreement. "Makes sense, your old one wasn't built by Charlie after all." I didn't build anything, I rolled my eyes. "What about you guys? Did you always live in Axbury?" I thought about it for a second. "Well, ever since I can remember, so I suppose always." Jules nodded in agreement. "So you were born here?" Jules answered before I could. "No, nobody is born here. You come to Axbury when you become a family. My mom said you have to apply, and they mostly consider people who already have children. It does make sense because the houses are all too big for just a couple or a single person." "Sounds logical, so you were probably just too young to remember moving here." Jules nodded. "All I know is that our families must have come here only a year apart from each other because Charlie and I've known each other since kindergarten." For some peculiar reason, she said that in a threatening tone. Was Jules afraid that Alex, as my new neighbor, would replace her as a friend? It felt flattering though unnecessary. Alex ignored her and looked at me. "What about your brother? How old is he, like 10? Do you remember him being born?" I opened my mouth to answer, but couldn't when I felt a pulsating pain going through my left hand that was holding my coffee cup. I immediately dropped the cup, which started spilling all over the table. "What the? Oh dear, I am sorry. I must be losing my mind missing your cup like that. Let me make that up to you with a free piece of pie." It was the waitress who, without me noticing, was back at the table. I hadn't even asked for a refill. On our cycle back home, all I could think about was Benny. He'd always been my brother, but I had never thought about his birth until Alex asked about it. It must have been here in Axbury. But why couldn't I remember anything about it? Jules and Alex were talking about all kinds of things on our way home, but I stayed silent. I was too occupied with my own thoughts. I hadn't even realized that we were already back on our street. "Do you guys want to go to the cinema or something tomorrow?" she said once we were in front of my house. "Yeah, that sounds good," Alex said, and I nodded. We said our goodbyes, and Jules cycled on. Alex was just about to head home as well, but I grabbed his arm before he could. "Why are you acting like nothing happened?" I surprised myself with my sudden courage. Alex's face shifted for a second. His brows frowned, but then he forced it back to a smile. "I'm trying to be normal. Well, for my parents." He looked around the street. "They like it here. It makes them happy. I want to be happy too. I shouldn't have jumped on you like that. I just found it so weird that your name was on my skin when I'd never even met you before, and I'm pretty sure that it has been on my stomach before we even moved here. Like someone tried to make sure I wouldn't forget, you know." He shook his head before I could answer. "Sorry, I think it's best if we just don't think about it any longer. I actually get an awful migraine when I try to. I'll see you tomorrow." Maybe Alex was able to shove his suspicions down, but I couldn't any longer. I contemplated talking to my parents about Benny's birth during dinner, but for some reason, I couldn't. It seemed like a bad idea, though I couldn't explain why. I acted normal, just like Alex, but that night I couldn't sleep again. I'd never had trouble with sleep before. Something about me had changed ever since the Lesters moved in next door. And it wasn't just me who acted differently. That night I realized that there was something wrong with my family as well. I was lying in bed, my eyes open and focused on the ceiling, my thoughts flowing in all sorts of directions. And then I heard it, a sound through the usually so suffocating silence. I got up to look at Alex's window, but this time it wasn't coming from him. It was coming from downstairs. That was strange. My parents were never up at night. My heart was racing inside my chest as I slowly made my way down the stairs, following the voice of someone to the kitchen. It's hard to say where my nervousness was coming from. That was my home, after all, the place that should make me feel safe. And the thing is, I wasn't scared of an intruder. We didn't have any crime in Axbury. It was the safest place you could imagine. I was so scared because the person whose voice I was hearing was my father. He was speaking so quietly that I wasn't sure what he was muttering at first. But then I realized it was a name. Lucy. His whisper slowly became louder. Lucy, you are dead. We are all dead. The unusual sight of my father at night like this, talking that way, sent a shiver down my spine. For a moment I just stood in the doorway, not sure what to do. Finally, I whispered, Dad. With a sudden move, he turned around and our eyes met. I can't say which of us looked more distressed. They are growing corpses. You die the second you set foot here, he said. What? My breathing stopped when I suddenly felt a touch on my shoulder. What is going on here? It was my mom, and I'd never been happier to see her. Mom walked Dad back upstairs to their room. Then she came back and heated up a cup of milk for me. Your father did something horrible, she said after a long silence. But he never meant to. He is a good man, a truly good man. Sometimes his head becomes a bit broken. She looked at me, wiping away a single tear from her cheek. But please don't worry, my child. I will call the doctor tomorrow, and he will be fine. Go back to bed now. I will bring you the milk, okay? She smiled at me and we hugged. For a moment I really felt better and safe again. I walked towards the stairs, but turned around one more time to ask my mother something that had been bugging me since the afternoon. Mom, what was the place like where we lived before here? My mother smiled and answered without thinking about it for even a second. Typical, not spectacular, a place to live, not to love. We had neighbors, but no real community, and our house wasn't as nice as the one we live in now. Getting rid of Jules wasn't easy, but it had to be done. I vividly remember meeting my best friend. It's one of the few memories I have that appear somewhat clear in my mind, a happy moment without alteration. Of course, it was easier then because I was younger, although I can't say how old for sure. I'd been trying to remember whether Benny was already born. I'd been trying that for different memories, but he only appeared in more recent ones. But the image of Jules is as clear as day. She was like a ray of sunshine, dressed in a white skirt with lots of bright lemons, almost the color of her hair. Her mom had the same lemons on her apron. We went over to their house after they'd invited us to a barbecue. The parents were chatting loudly. Our moms connected right away, and so did Jules and I. After we ate, we went inside and played games. Thinking about it now, it was a lot like the day Alex's family came over. We liked to repeat stuff. After that day we were inseparable. She introduced me to everything I know and love. I used to look at her and feel like I belonged. The last time I looked at her, I wished that she would drop dead. Mom and Dad were both gone. Mom had work to do, which was odd for a Sunday, but sometimes that's what it was like. We never questioned her work. Dad had gone to some kind of play date with Benny. None of us mentioned last night during breakfast. Jules and I were in my room, getting ready for the cinema. I knew right away that there was a reason why she came to my place before. She wanted to talk about Alex. I meant to keep things to myself, at least for now, but after the night I was feeling awfully nervous. Instead of drinking the milk last night, I'd poured it away because I didn't want to sleep. I wanted to think. Now, with only 2 hours of sleep and a mind going in all directions, I started regretting my decision. It made me more emotional and less careful. When she asked about Alex, Jules probably wanted to know if I had a crush on him or something. You can imagine the look she gave me when I told her about everything. The words came out of my mouth like vomit. The engraved name, the view from my window on his first night, the things Father said. I was pushing my fingernails into the palm of my hand to keep myself from starting to cry. He looked so scary, nothing like my dad, I whispered after I'd poured out everything that had happened without a pause. Jules had been watching me carefully and quietly the entire time. But, Jules, I don't think he's going crazy. I think he tried to warn me. I whispered the last part even though we were all alone in the house. My friend got up and sat down right next to me on the bed, with no distance to move. She put her hands on top of mine, which were still formed into fists, and gently lifted up my fingers. Then she moved her hands to my wrists and grabbed them tightly. God, you are so stupid. Her tone was mellow, cold. What? She sighed. Insufferable, really. If it weren't for your mother, you'd probably be long dead. I don't even want to know how often your parents drug you, although I can assume. I stared at her face that showed not a single sign of emotion. Her grip became even tighter. I am sorry, Charlie. I hope we could earn our place in Axbury alongside each other. Of course, I would have gotten married first and worked to be accepted as a member with my own house. And then you could have tried the same. We would have been like our moms. With our upbringing, we would have had many years to live. Now only one of us does. I tried to pull away, but now her nails were digging into my flesh. What on earth are you talking about, Jules? Only worthy ones are chosen to live in heaven, Charlie. Our families worked so hard to come to Axbury. They spend all their time becoming important members of the community. One day, they will be chosen to become the soil that nourishes our earth. The earth that gives up happiness, fortune, and health in return. Finally, she was showing emotion, but in a way that made my blood freeze. Her eyes were opened wide the entire time, as if she'd forgotten how to blink, and her teeth were grinding loudly against each other as she tried to force the biggest smile I'd ever seen. Where did you learn all this? What soil? You mean when we die and are buried? When we are offered and buried? Silly. But only when it is our time to leave Axbury, and I have no intention of leaving the community anytime soon. But you, she signed. You don't understand it, Charlie. Even with all the years your parents have tried to prepare you, you've stayed clueless. Do you know how hard it is to be friends with someone so dumb? If it weren't for your lovely mom, I would have abandoned you much sooner. She loosened her grip slightly and tilted her head. Oh, poor Charlie, you look so scared. Don't worry, it will all be fine. You won't be turned into soil before you turn 18. I will talk to your mother and she will wipe your little memory as gently as she can, and then we can have a bit more time together. While all her words were like daggers in my brain, I had to focus. It was possible that my friend had lost her mind, but after everything I'd witnessed these past days, I think the truth was much more complicated. And whatever happened, I couldn't let her talk to my parents. I had to keep my memory clear. So, as Jules kept blabbering about her fruitful future, I slammed my head against hers in a moment of surprise. I didn't even think about it. My body simply started to act, and my brain tried hard no time to keep up. She instinctively let my arms go, and I got up as quickly as I could, ignoring the pain in my face. She followed fast and grabbed my shirt to pull me down to my knees. Help, she shouted, but I shut her up by pushing my elbow into her stomach. She dropped to the ground, and I quickly jumped on top of her, pushing my knee into her chest. As the adrenaline rushed through my body, I tried to think of my next step. I wasn't used to fighting anyone, and then we were interrupted. What the hell? A new voice spoke. It was Alex, who had come inside without our knowledge. Nobody in bloody Axbury ever locks their door. Get her off me. Jules started crying. Alex didn't move. He looked at our bloody faces. When Jules said Charlie has gone mad, it looked as if something inside of him clicked. Do you have tape? A rope, maybe. Jules and I both stared at him. I took a deep breath. Jules said my mother drugs me. Can you hold her down while I look for something? It was in the honey. There was no scent to it, but it made the most sense. She kept it hidden at the back of the highest cupboard, and we never had honey with breakfast or any other meal, but it was always in my milk. Getting Jules to swallow the honey mixture I made wasn't easy, but we managed. My heart was racing the entire time. My mind was so focused on hoping that nobody would come home that I didn't even have time to process what had just happened. Together with Alex, I had drugged my best friend, tied her up, and hid the sleeping girl in my closet. The pain only got to me as Alex, and I cycled all the way to Axbury Lake, and I told him everything I'd learned from my father and Jules. Axbury Lake was my favorite place because I could always go there to be alone. Of course, back then I didn't know that the people of Axbury regularly fed it with corpses because they believed that it nourished our water. Alex looked surprised after everything I told him, though not as much as me. Maybe because his old life was more recent than mine. I don't know why I never questioned anything before. Axbury really does feel like heaven. But lately, everyone seems to be breaking a little. Jules said something about them turning people into soil. When they find me, I stopped talking. We need to get away, Alex said firmly. There is no place in Axbury where we can hide, and we can never get far enough on our bikes. And what about our families? I wrapped my arms around my legs. So what now? He asked. I shrugged. I'm sorry I pulled you into this. I took a deep breath. Why did you even help me and not Jules? Alex started tapping his fingers on the ground nervously. When I saw you there, something in my mind shattered. For a moment I remembered the night we came here. Your dad was there, and other adults. He paused for a moment. They hurt me, tried to make me comply or whatever. Jules was there as well, with all the adults. I think it was some kind of initiation. And she seemed weirdly into it. She had that look your mom always has, the one my parents now have as well. I swallowed. Was it that night you carved my name into you? Yes, I don't remember everything, but I know it was bad. And it's our families that did this to us. We need to get help or... Charlie, both of us turned around in the same second to see where the voice was coming from. It was my dad, walking down the path that leads from the street to the lake. I jumped up. Damn, what now? Alex looked just as clueless as me, and even more afraid when his eyes met the ones of my dad. At the top of the path, I saw a car. We didn't have a car. Nobody in Axbury did. There was no need for the residents of Axbury to have cars. We had bikes for short trips inside the town. And if we wanted, we could buy skateboards or roller skates, but nothing with a motor. If you are someone with important privileges, you do drive a car at times. For example, if you pick up a new family and dad was a trusted resident, but I had no idea why he had it now. Was he trying to get rid of us? Get in the car. Now, Alex and I both turned to the water for a split second. Should we try to swim? I didn't even know where the lake ended. We don't have much time. Get in the car now. Benny's already inside. Hurry. How did you know that we were at the lake? After I found Jules in your closet and saw that your bike was gone, I just assumed. You used to run away to the lake often after we'd moved to Axbury. I think you were too young to understand the full extent, but your gut already knew this place was wrong. I wish mine had as well. Only as we reached roads that I'd never seen before, my heartbeat started slowing down. Lately, I've been too afraid of my own family. If my dad hadn't mentioned Benny, I probably would have jumped in the water. Now I was glad that I hadn't. After my father finally, for the first time in my life, really spoke the truth. Axbury was a paradise, a place that you didn't choose but had to be chosen for. If you showed enough determination and love to grow this community. We met one of their spokesmen on a holiday once. He told us about this wonderful place where families live together in happiness, where there is no crime, no hate. Of course, we didn't believe much of what he was saying at first, but they get to you eventually. You were only 10 back then. We didn't have much money and little support from our respective families. Axbury was going to fill all those voids for us, so we wrote our application and had many interviews and trials. It took almost a year until we finally received the acceptance letter. Your mother couldn't believe her eyes. I'd never seen her happier than that day. Alex and I stayed silent, sucking in all the words my dad was speaking. I was sitting at the front next to my dad while Alex was in the back with the fast asleep Benny. There were so many rules. We weren't allowed to conceive more children. We weren't allowed to leave, even for vacation. Weren't allowed to own a car. When I think about it now, I believe we were insane for wanting it, but they had a way to be persuasive. I didn't like where things were going, and we were happy we'd convinced ourselves to be. Your mother especially, even when she learned about the ritual. Once a year a family is chosen. Often it happens when their youngest child turns 18. I want to spare you the horrifying details, but these families never truly leave Axbury. They believe, and I used to as well, that dying and becoming a part of Axbury's grounds was the greatest honor. The town feeds on the dead and pays its residents with good fortune. My stomach started turning. But wait, we moved here before Benny was born. This isn't adding up, I said. My dad nervously looked through the mirror at Benny. They don't always wait until the child turns 18. He needed a new family. I looked at the sweet face of the boy I only knew as my brother and couldn't help but imagine what they'd done to his parents. This couldn't be real. Dad, where are we going? He took a deep breath. We are getting away before they notice that the car is gone. Where to? I'm not sure yet. He looked at Alex. I know this is a lot for you too. I'm sure you don't want to leave your parents, but... He stopped talking. Why now? Alex suddenly asked. Why should we even believe you? I know you were there on my first night. Why didn't you help us? He was almost shouting now. Because I needed time to become myself again. Normally, when a new family comes, their children are still pretty young. They can be persuaded easily. For you it was hard. Your parents tried to talk you into it, but you couldn't be convinced. But they wanted this so much and showed all this determination. They'd have done anything. And I saw it on the night you moved in. We were going paths I'd never seen before, luckily with no people in sight. I can't believe other residents haven't tried to flee. I wondered how people could be persuaded so easily, but remembered that I'd been the same until now. But the moment something in my mind really shattered was when I heard them call you by your real name. Charlie, my dad continued. Alex and I exchanged a confused look. It reminded me how they wipe everything from our old lives. You having the current name of my daughter. He looked at Alex through the mirror. It reminded me of her real one. Lucy, I whispered. A tear was forming in the corner of my dad's eye. I am so sorry for everything we've done to you, children. I pulled you aside that night. He was talking to Alex again. Pressured you to not forget your name. I thought I could do something at least. But it took me some time to collect the courage and formulate my plan. I wanted to get more children out of there, but they have very smart ways to trick the outside world as well. If I went to the authorities, they'd only put me in jail for kidnapping. I felt like I would throw up any second. Dad, what about Mom? Your mother would happily die to become soil for the grounds of Axbury, and she'd take us with her. For now, we need to save ourselves.